Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. What a great turnout. Wonderful to see you all. Over 300 RSVPs for tonight. I'm John Calderazzo. I'm a writer and a recently retired CSU English professor. I'm going to read from this so I don't waste any time because we want to get to the meat of the evening. And one of the things I'm doing with my supposed new free time in retirement is acting as a citizen volunteer to help the city's climate action plan employees and talk about climate change and what we're doing about it now and what we can do in the future. It's been an immense privilege to learn about and to work with such smart and dedicated folks at the city. We really have great city employees. I didn't know them before. I'm really impressed. Yesterday, I found out that yesterday marked 50 years to the day that our first view of planet Earth from deep space was captured on camera. On August 23rd, 1966, Lunar Orbiter 1 took a black and white shot of the only home we have, floating serenely through space. The iconic blue marble image of Earth would not come until 6 years later. Both photographs underscored the reality that despite political and cultural differences, all of us on the planet were in it together. Both photographs were just a small part of our incredibly ambitious and successful US space program, which I think it's safe to say represented human ingenuity at the highest level. Our best thinking and our best actions powered by collective willpower and excitement. A lot of you remember that excitement. Now here we are half a century later. Our only home is still floating through space, but less serenely. Global climate change is upon us, boy, is it ever, and we're in it together to face it in a timely fashion, and we hope to thrive. To do that, we're going to need hope and a reprise of our ingenuity and action powered by collective willpower. Environmentalists and entrepreneurs, politicians and power company executives, citizens and city employees, bringing their best thinking to bear. Governor Ritter's brand new book is packed with realistic and hopeful examples from the brave new frontier of this enterprise, in which our city's cutting-edge and realistic climate action plan is a major player. That's why we're here tonight, to talk about all of this. Bill Ritter was Colorado's 41st governor, and he signed 57 clean energy bills into law. Now, as the director for the New Energy Economy, the Center for the New Energy Economy at CSU, he assists other state governments with developing energy policy. And of course, he's the new author of this book. Mayor Wade Troxel has been on the faculty at CSU for more than 30 years. He's serving his first term as mayor after 8 years on city council. He's a big believer in supporting the community's role in innovation. And Darren Atterbury has been the city manager since 2004, and he's led city government through a data-driven, performance-based approach. He's a strong advocate for community collaboration and sustainability inside and outside the municipal organization. So Darren, take it away.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for being here. And I know I can say on behalf of council members who are here and the mayor and our staff, what a very, very encouraging turnout. And so let me thank you for being here and also say thanks in advance for your participation. So we really would like to hear from you, as was mentioned earlier. My job is to kind of keep us on track. Those of you who know me know that's going to be a very big challenge for me, right? But at some point, probably in about a half an hour, there'll be people kind of roaming around and asking for you to fill out some forms and get us some questions. So we would really appreciate that. But again, I look in the room and I look at the folks who are here and just the differences of thinking and involvement in your local government, and it makes me really proud to be city manager of a community where there's this level of engagement, and I just want to say thanks to everyone. And Governor and Wade, your near lifelong commitment to public service, I just want to say publicly how impressive that is and how much, just on behalf of the group, thank you for the work that you guys have done. And Governor, when you were in office, you were so accessible for Fort Collins. And I just want to say thank you for that, and thank you for serving this community and the time that you spent up here while you had lots of busy, crazy things going on and lots of work.
Thank you.
Let's see. So tonight is not intended to be a political event. It's intended to provoke thinking and deeper level thinking around these topics. We think that there are no right answers, and we're going to try and do that. We're not trying to convince. We're not trying to necessarily advocate. I think it's really to have a community conversation about ideas. And so some of the things that I think folks will say, you'll probably agree with. Some of the things you won't say, and hopefully we'll hear from you during the questions and then also during the after the event. You know, I was just thinking about what I've always appreciated about Fort Collins is that our community has allowed its local government, through many partnerships like Colorado State and many others, to think big and to be aspirational, and in particular to think about the future. And so as a city manager in this community and working with a lot of elected officials over the years, the privilege of not just thinking about one term of office, either a 2-year term or a 4-year term or 8 years, but getting to think way out. And I know I've said many times what's even better about Fort Collins is we get to talk about not only 20 to 25 years out, but 100 years out. And so I think there's going to be a lot of conversation about a big horizon here. And so, you know, this tonight is intended to be about learning and sharing. And so, again, thank you for being here. And I'm going to start with a question for Bill, and that is, when you were governor and you had significant issues like prisons and roads and higher ed and K-12, why climate? Why energy?
So even I would take it back from before I was governor to a time when I was a candidate and really began investigating, even before I got in the race, began investigating the issues that I thought were most important to Colorado. I'd been the Denver District Attorney, I'd been in public life, and elected life for 12 years, but as a public prosecutor, I'd lived in Africa for 3 years, and still I thought, you know, I want to have an agenda. If I'm going to be governor, if I'm going to put myself through it, both as a candidate and as the governor. And as I began to investigate, I saw first the opportunity that Colorado had to transition to this different, what we called energy economy, gave it finally the term a new energy economy, and really saw this as some promise, something of hope in terms of building a different kind of energy economy, borrowing on the innovation, on the academic institutions, on the national laboratories, all that. And so as I looked at that, I also began to really try and understand the issue around climate science. And I had not, quite frankly, paid attention to that as a prosecutor in Denver. I hadn't done as much work on that, and really as governor I began to, or as a candidate, so that while I was a candidate and even as I was governor and governing, I came to a belief that this was not just an important issue, but existential. And I had lived in sub-Saharan Africa for 3 years, lived in a very arid part of the world where people live in some pretty desperate circumstances. And I was informed by that as much as I was informed by sort of the science of it, knowing that people around the globe, if we don't address climate science or climate change in a serious way, it will have an impact on a lot of people who were not responsible for the problem, who will be hit first and worst, and who already live pretty desperate situations. And all of that kind of brought me to a place of thinking and understanding that this was among the most important and biggest challenges we face as humans and as, you know, citizens of the planet. And so I guess you would say I gravitated to it over time, but once I did, I considered it an existential threat for the globe and important to really devote my energies to.
So what about the thoughts around a term of office or a 20-year window or a 100-year window? How do you How are we doing at that? Do you think that we're focusing successfully on the very long term?
No, I'd say if you look at Congress, if you haven't read a book called It's Even Worse Than It Looks about the United States Congress, my college professor, Professor Bob Lawrence, is in the back of the room, and I was a political science student here, and this is as bad as it's been maybe since before the Civil War, how the Congress currently functions. There's a political culture there that's very short-term and very much about sort of the first Tuesday in November during election years. Who's going to win? Who's going to be in a majority? And as a result, we haven't solved big problems. The reason I'm really glad to be doing this, the further you get outside the Beltway, the more people are interested in solving problems, including big ones. And so my work with states around the country, actually we have the opportunity to work with a variety of people on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, and then you get to a municipal level where you don't know if a person's a Republican or a Democrat. They're even closer to the problems in many respects, and they're working on big problems, but they're working on it in sort of an aggregate way. If we could get Congress to behave like the city councils in these, I'm very serious about this, if the city councils around this country behave, and the mayors behave, and even the governors and state legislatures in many places behave, we would be so much better off, because we exist in a different political culture at the state and municipal level than they do in Washington, D.C. And I don't feel passionate about this, by the way.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate that passion. So Wade, how about you? You know, when you made a choice, you went from City Council District 4 to after 8 years, and to become the mayor. And I'm interested in you sharing, if you would, a little bit about your story. And I know your work at CSU and systems thinking would be really great if you could share some of that.
You bet. Well, and this is my hometown. I grew up in Fort Collins, and so I take a long view perspective looking forward, but part of that long view is also looking back at decisions that were made when I was growing up. This used to be the junior high I went to, and I just think about those sorts of things. Now it's a Lincoln Center and a great facility for the city of Fort Collins. But I think back to decisions that were made, and my dad was on the city council in the 1960s, and decisions such as undergrounding our electric power system in Fort Collins, a decision that was made at that time. And I think of that, and today people look at and around Fort Collins, it's clean, you have nice view sheds and things like that. A lot of what they don't know is what they don't see, and what they don't see is a lot of power lines. You go to other communities, you see power lines. I think of that as a decision that was made at a time that, that must have been a very difficult decision because of the costs and undergrounding and for what benefit? Well, it doesn't snow that much, and there'd be all the reasons why not to do something. And today we realize the benefits in a lot of the existential sorts of ways, a lot of the benefits that are difficult to quantify. And I think about our community today. It's more resilient, it's more beautiful, and things like that for just that one decision. And that decision also, there wasn't the technology and other things available at the time in order to do that. So Stu Case and the Light and Power Director at the time, they had to invent some things in order to accomplish that. So I think of that as well. Not all the solutions are on the shelf ready to be deployed. And so it's thinking about, in the long view, going forward and decisions that were made. And it's decisions like that, I think, Fort Collins is aspirational, but it's also very pragmatic. And that's where I think we are right now in this, as it relates to the local level, is how do you operationalize this, bring it home today here in a way that makes sense for all of our community? And that's where, I think it's a good thing to have solid infrastructure and be resilient and to basically look to the future in all different sorts of ways. And that's where I think it's really nothing different than what Fort Collins has always done in thinking about our community and how to make it better in the long run.
Good. It would be good I'd love to hear your thoughts about 20-year planning versus 100-year. I know you've been a big part of that.
Right.
Want to share anything?
Well, when I was first on council, a lot of the decisions were very incremental, and it was just nibbling around the edges. And one of the things we've instituted, Darren, appreciate your leadership over the years, but we have a futures committee of city council, subcommittee of council, where we actually are able to talk about things that aren't in the, next year, next budget, and that sort of way, but we think about the longer time horizon, and we talk about things in 30, 50, 100 years out, not to be foolhardy or to be just to talk about things that don't have relevance, but you can think about things in a context and you dial it back, and what does it mean? Are we on the right vector? Does it mean we're at the destination? And so we were able to talk about things, and you mentioned my role at the university, so I tend to get involved with systems thinking, systems engineering, and that takes a more holistic view of things, so that the dimensionality of it becomes richer in terms of the decisions and understanding. So it's not very narrow and incremental, but you can think about other dimensions to it, and in that context, I think we get richer decisions in terms of why we're trying to do certain sorts of things, and also I think it enables various viewpoints, not a singular viewpoint. And getting to Bill's comment about local government, we have a great functioning city council right now, and does that mean we agree on everything? No. But if you really look at it, we agree 90% on things. And when we don't agree, bring your best argument and let's have our discussion, then vote, and then we move on. And so I think a lot of it is in the context of having a discussion. Let's bring the best thinking. And that's why I love this forum and people and being a university city, and the kind of people that come to our community on a regular basis from all around the world, and having those kinds of discussions and conversations. And it only enriches the lives that we have here, but also I think our decisions, and we truly have an engaged community, a passionate community, a community that cares about our community. So I think that only makes for better outcomes in the long run. And when you have that longer time horizon, I think it also has a much richer perspective as to what we're trying to do.
So thanks for letting us safely talk about beyond 20 years, out 100 years. That is a big deal for Fort Collins, to allow its local government and allow its partners to talk beyond the normal planning horizon of 20 years. We get to have conversations like these in that environment, in an environment where you're in term windows or 10-year, 20-year windows. You don't get to talk about some of these big things like the undergrounding that Wade talked about. So, Bill, you say in your book that fairness and equity for low-income households should be paramount. What would or could work for municipalities in that space? And then, do you have any thoughts about Fort Collins specifically?
Yeah, so you could really build a clean energy world on the back of poor people, on the backs of poor people. We've thought about this, and one of my cabinet members, your former mayor, Susan Kirkpatrick, is here. And she knows, right? We talked about the new energy economy, and it was about domestic energy. It was about environmental concerns. It was about economic development. But we had this fourth E that was about equity, because you really have to pay attention to middle-income people, lower middle-income people, and even poor people. An energy bill to them is very significant. Even people on fixed incomes, it can represent a big part of what their outlay is every month. And so we thought about that. We screened everything we did sort of through the lens of what about poor people? What about lower income, lower middle income people? And we tried to do things to ensure that we protected them in one way or another. So there's already federal programs. It's called LIHEAP, Low Income Energy Assistance Programs. Then there's LEAP in the state of Colorado. It's a state program. But in addition to that, there's a variety of things that we're trying to do that we began doing in Colorado. We're the first state to sign a bill called Property Assessment Clean Energy, so you could voluntarily up your property assessment, amortize the cost of clean energy, either renewable energy or energy efficiency, over a 20-year period by elevating your property assessment. And the FHA shut it down for a little while. It just came back this summer, but it's a way for middle income and lower middle income people to participate in a clean energy economy. The federal government has the Clean Power Plan I think we're going to talk a little bit about. But one of the things the EPA said, if you go in as a community or as a state and you install clean energy solutions, either energy efficiency or renewables, in low-income places or in tribal areas, you get double what's called the allowance. If you're in a trading system where you're trading carbon credits, you get double the credit for doing that in low income or on tribal, on Native American, tribal ground in Indian country, it's called in the federal statutes. So those are all of the kinds of ways, there's all sorts of thinking about ways to do that. So as a municipality and a municipal utility, I think you find ways to ensure that you're, first of all, communicating with those folks who are considered lower income people and might not otherwise think that they have the ability to do the capital outlay for energy efficiency. And then you connect with both the state government and the federal government around the LEAP, the LIHEAP programs, the Clean Energy Incentive Program that's part of the EPA's power plant. All of those things are available there. Oftentimes people just don't, municipalities don't access it. States sometimes don't access it. And we wind up leaving a lot of stuff on the table that responds directly to that group of people.
Right. We're all taking notes, right? City staff.
I'm available for a consult over at CSU's power plant.
Wade, what do you think about that?
Well, in bringing it back to the local level, a lot of the programs that Bill mentioned that we do participate in, both Fort Collins utilities as well as in partnership with Platte River Power Authority amongst the 4 cities that make up Platte River Power Authority. And there are a number of programs that we engage with together for energy efficiency, low income, and we just recently as a council talked about an assistance program related to our utilities across the board. And so, I think an important part as it relates to Fort Collins, and as we generally look at, and we're heading into our biennial budget, is we look through a lens of the triple bottom line, social, economic, and environmental, and really look at all our decisions in that context. And so it's simply not lowest cost, it's basically cost effective in the context of meeting multiple objectives as a community, and as it relates to energy efficiency and infrastructure that can, whether it's transportation systems, which plays a key role in this as well. And we think about our land use and our building codes and all those sorts of things are all very relevant to how do we make, and we have a challenge right now with affordable housing in general, just because of a lot of issues there, and we're doing specific things that we have land bank that we're basically building some low-income housing in the context of a city's role in terms of meeting some of those objectives. And so, there's a lot of things that the city can do as the rubber meets the road throughout a lot of the things that we do as a council.
So can I just add a couple of things to this? We just, at the Center for the New Energy Economy, we've been in a project with the Nature Conservancy for the past year and a half. We just published a website. It looks at 38 clean energy policies across all 50 states. So we take each policy, each state, and we ask 5 questions, and we have a narrative about it. It's the most granular look at clean energy policy and what we call the gap analysis in America. And so it comes out of CSU, and we're really proud of this. But one of the things that we look at are energy efficiency policies and renewable policies that are about financing, and particularly financing for low income. And there's all these great ideas that are being done at the state level. A lot of states have not done anything about it, but can be done at the state level. But some of those translate very well to the municipal level as well. And you were talking about the cost-effective test. This is an interesting statistic. The 3 states that have employed the cost-effectiveness test as opposed to a cost-benefit test or a lowest cost test, they have deployed the most energy efficiency, and all the economic modeling that we've done on how to get down emissions in this country, energy efficiency is the lowest cost, lowest risk to reduce your emissions over time. And so municipalities could absolutely do this and look at ways to do that for the low-income people.
For folks who are in the room who don't necessarily every Tuesday night pay attention to what happens at city council meetings, I will tell you, and I didn't mean that critically, I will tell you this is a topic that's a very, very important topic at City Hall right now, and it's getting a lot of attention around people on fixed income. I know Councilmember Martinez has been very active in this conversation, talking about low-income rates, things like that. This idea of social equity and how some of the things that we're talking about and how what Bill has written in his book is, it's very directly related at the local level. And I think this local government in particular is trying to get through those conversations. But we have restructured the city organization, a part of the city organization, and the mayor mentioned this, but this sustainability idea has been expanded to, we talk about the triple bottom line: social health, the economic health, and the environmental health, as the mayor said. And we've restructured some of the city organization around that triple bottom line. And what I'm really, really excited about is we're really seeing some fruits of the labor and of the reorganization, where you're seeing, Josh Burks, our economic health director, working very closely with Lucinda Smith, our environmental services director, and social, and Beth Souter in social equity. And we're starting to see that idea of sustainability operationalized. And through both formal structure, but also through relationships and these teams, the way they're working together, I think we are well poised for looking out into the future. And I'm really proud of the folks that have done that, and the council who's led a lot of that. So, Governor, in your book, you mentioned, and I think this relates to the last item, but it's a really, really important point, I think. You mentioned that reliable energy, affordable energy, and clean energy are not mutually exclusive. Can you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, it was part of what, part of putting this agenda in place. There were a lot of naysayers. And the naysayers, if you've ever been in public life, people come at you and they throw up a bunch of arguments, and oftentimes they're just straw arguments, and you got to figure out, okay, can we put them down and try and be reasonable in how you debate that? But over time, it'll either prove out to be the case or not, And so we look at the naysayers back in 2004. First of all, when the state put in a 10% renewable energy standard, that naysaying was sort of elevated when it became about a politician doing it, a governor doing it, as opposed to the people of the state voting on it. And certainly when we went to 30% in 2010, we passed 30% by 2020, there were a lot of naysayers, and they were saying exactly that you cannot build affordable clean energy. You can't put it on the grid. It wouldn't integrate on the grid. It would be way too expensive. All of these things, and they were really leading what I would call a fear-based campaign, in part to protect their own incumbency. There are a lot of moneyed interest. And I, in that book, talk about the coal industry in a very sort of warm kind of way, thanking them for building an economy and really an industrial prowess in America. But at the same time, they were fighting me when we were saying we could build affordable, clean, reliable energy. And the proof is in the pudding. In a sense, right? We go to a 30% renewable energy standard. Xcel Energy, let's just take them as an example. They're the biggest provider of electricity in the state of Colorado. They will decrease their emissions 35% between 2005 and 2020. But they've also been able to do it by using wind, solar, and natural gas. They've been able to do it and hold their prices down. The price of wind went from 9.5 cents a kilowatt hour in 2006 to less than 3 cents a kilowatt hour over like a 10-year period. And they did it because we built out an economy of scale, and we had a bit of a pull that was a policy pull. And so it winds up, if you look at what people are paying for rates, where they've gotten 57 to 60% wind on a given day, plus natural gas and the emissions that they've been able to reduce utilizing natural gas, all of that taken together, they've been able to do that and protect ratepayers. We had this thing we did called Clean Air, Clean Jobs. We took a gigawatt of coal out, transitioned it to natural gas, mostly in the metro area, and that's costing ratepayers 5 cents a month. And there were a lot of people saying it was going to be 20% added on their bill, compounded every year. That was some of the modeling that came before the PUC. It winds up being 5 cents a month. So yes, you can have affordable, reliable, clean energy that is a way to protect ratepayers, but get these other kinds of benefits that you talked about.
I'm going to go to you in 1 second, Wade. Emily, so you're walking around, right, asking for people to hand you any questions that you may have. So there's Emily, and I think, so Emily will come your way. If you could do that, and what we're going to do in about 10, 12 minutes, I'm sorry, in about 22 minutes, we're going to dedicate the remaining 15 minutes to your questions. So Wade, how about, back to you, how about your thoughts about that topic?
You bet. Well, when I first became mayor, I have two priorities. And really, you're limited in the council manager form of government, so I'm a regular member of council. But two priorities to help me figure out best use of my time, and one of them is civic engagement for youth and young adults. But the second one is that we're an innovation community, and in that framework, I had the honor in June of last year to open an exhibit at the Smithsonian at the U.S. Museum of American History of places of innovation, where Fort Collins is featured one of 6 cities as a place of innovation. 5 of the cities were in the past, Hartford, Connecticut in the 1880s and so forth, Silicon Valley in the 1960s. Fort Collins is the only city that's featured in the 2010s going forward. And it's around clean, renewable energy for a better climate and Earth sort of perspective. And this is an exhibit that's running at the Smithsonian right now for the next 4+ years. And what that says to me, and it really recognizes, looking at the opportunities as it relates to clean, renewable energy, and what they featured, or what they do feature in that exhibit, is collaboration and partnerships. And I reflect back upon the Fort Zed project that this community did with CSU and the city of Fort Collins as the lead, and 13 private sector partners and other government entities demonstrating peak load reduction at 2 system feeder peaks in Fort Collins, utilizing technology that basically was able to manage distributed energy resources within the community, such that you didn't have to draw from the primary power source, but you could actually utilize resources within your community in a timely sort of a way. And it reduced it 20 to 30% at key periods when the demand's the greatest. And so it demonstrates the fact that if we actually utilize our resources better within your community, that we can actually realize these goals in a way that's different than the system has operated historically, which Bill has pointed out. It's served us well since the 1930s and electrification of the United States and so forth. But we can operate the system differently. And the point is in Fort Collins, we have a lot of the companies that innovate and provide solutions, not only for Fort Collins, not only for Colorado, not only for the United States, but for around the world. And so if we better utilize these capabilities, we actually become better stewards of our resources. We also create new economies and new businesses and new technology that can actually realize this kind of future. So that's where I'm really optimistic about the future, where there are solutions that will be coming from Fort Collins, Colorado, that's not only achieving our future, but other futures around the world. And so that's the opportunity that I think, and it's reframing the system, how that it delivers energy as we know it. A lot more private sector folks are investing in plug-in electric vehicles and solar on roofs and things like that. And that can be better integrated into an operating system than it has operated historically. Yeah.
Good. Bill, you've mentioned that the 3 biggest emitters are buildings, transportation systems, and power plants. And then you make a connection to the state and local government. Can you share some of your thoughts on that?
So I think it's interesting. Just this month or last month, as a nation, transportation became a bigger emitter than the power industry. Industrial buildings are about 20%, and the power plants have been 50%, transportation 30%, and then kind of moved to where transportation overtook power plants, in part because emissions have gone down at power plants in such a significant way. There's been, and you have to credit natural gas in part for that. There's been a big transition out of coal to natural gas. That's caused us to reduce our carbon emissions pretty significantly. There's also more new build of renewables than any other type of power in the last year or 2 years in the United States. So even then more new natural gas, there have been more new renewables and a flattening of demand because of energy conservation. So all those things have caused the emissions from the power sector to go down. Transportation then has become sort of one of the big emitters, but if you take industrial buildings and power sector together, it's still a big problem. And what we call the built environment is a really significant part of this. Now, municipalities actually have more to do with what we would call the built environment than the state level. The state, you have a lot you can do with the power sector, and a lot is governed and legislated or regulated at the state level of the power sector. We have the Public Utilities Commission looking at the power sector for investor-owned utilities, but a lot of legislation otherwise. The renewable portfolio standards are typically state legislation. But if you think about the built environment and all of the gains that we have made and that we can make, it's municipalities that are the bigger player than even those at the state level. And so it's really important for municipalities to try and think about how we transition to a more efficient set of buildings in place. What's the carbon footprint of a building? And how do we change the carbon footprint? And so much that you can do through appliances and appliance standards, but also through just building codes. I went to Las Vegas to a city council meeting of all things, Wade, in Las Vegas. And they were actually debating going back to the 2003 building code. They were at 2000, they have the 2009. The question was, should they adopt 2013? I was there to talk about climate and energy stuff at the state level. So I was just auditing this meeting, and there were actually an argument about going back to 2003. That'd be a big step back, because if you look at cities that have adopted 2013 as their building code presently, it's an international code. They've made great strides in reducing the emissions. They're doing their part in reducing the emissions. And just as a final point, I went to Paris, was part of the State Department's group talking in Paris at the Accords on climate. And the discussion that I was a part of was, how can states and local governments be part of allowing nations to hit their climate targets? And it was a big conversation, differently than the prior accords, because there's a lot of nations who are turning to states and municipalities saying, you're going to have to do that for us because our national government's a little stuck on this.
So anytime you want to come to a Fort Collins City Council meeting, you don't have to audit it. You're welcome to come anytime. So, I have a question, maybe a follow-up question, and this might be unfair. If my next door neighbor is in here watching and he's listening to this conversation, what advice would you have at that level? What advice? My neighbor he's got solar on his roof. He's trying to do the right things. What would you say to him directly over my neighborhood?
It's interesting. There's a gentleman here from Solar City. He said Fort Collins is the #1 market for Solar City in the country.
Wow.
For referring people. For making your neighbor do what you did.
Right.
He said it in a kinder, gentler way. Jim, where are you? Where's our Solar City friend? There he is over there. And he said it's the #1 place in the country for doing this. And quite frankly, Solar City is an interesting model, because typically their business model is, we'll show you how to save money on your power by installing a third-party system. And we'll save money, because the least cost of that is going to actually be less than the savings that you're going to see on your fuel bill. And so that's a good thing, right? And your power is cheap here. Your power is pretty cheap. Right. And still, you have this market for solar, because you have a group of people who really understand and care about it, and who wind up referring each other, to look at this and get involved. So it is a community thing. My wife and I were here last night for a thing called People for a Healthier Larimer County. And it's on the ballot, and we won't get political, but it's about mental health and addiction services. And what she said was interesting, because she's in the mental health world. She said, people recover in communities. And I thought, God, that's a great thing for me to think about as an energy guy going around the country talking about this stuff. We do this in communities. Right. We don't do this as an outlier or an individual, or we certainly won't succeed. We'll succeed when a community says, we understand we need a climate plan, we understand we need an energy plan, we need a vision that looks beyond 20 years, because some of the stuff's going to hit us after that happens, but we have to begin making the difference now. And that's what I would say to your neighbors. Thank you, and refer me if you get a chance to Solar City, because I'd love to have what you have and feel good about it the way you do.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Wade?
Yeah, I think everything does, begin local. And I think that's where, in a lot of respects, this, what we're doing as a community, as a city council is how do we operationalize this locally in building codes and land use and our transit-oriented development and all different sorts of things. And when it boils down to neighbor, it has to make sense. It has to make economic sense, but a lot of these, the rate of returns pay for it. They live in a more comfortable home, and they actually end up putting more money back in their pocket. So it's one of those things that it's not a stretch. It's one of those that, needs to make sense, right at home.
Yeah.
What ideas do you have? Obviously, a critical partner here is the business community. What ideas or advice do you have for us here in Fort Collins and Northern Colorado around really successful collaborations with business?
So if I can put this in a little bit larger context, one of the things that's been most disturbing to me is how difficult the business community at the national level has been on clean power. The United States Chamber of Commerce basically fought everything I ever did as governor. They continue to fight people in Congress who are trying to move sort of a clean energy agenda. And so I joined a group called the Advanced Energy Economy that was hoping to build the business voice for clean energy in the United States. And one of the reasons I wanted to put that in context is because the very first thing I would say to the business community or talk to them about is opportunity. So, and you got something in your back door here in Fort Collins that's an example of it. We went to a 20% renewable energy standard. We had a variety of other things we were doing early in the time as governor, and I sat down with these people from Vestas Wind Systems. Right. And they were going to put Vestas plants somewhere in the United States, and they're going to build a plant, and they were going to put it in a state. And they decided on Colorado, not because we put money on the table, because we didn't have near as much as Texas or Ohio. They decided because we were going to make a commitment to clean energy and clean energy policy and a climate plan that they thought would, over time, help their business case. Now they have 4,000 employees that are direct employees in Colorado, 4 different plants, and they have all these different suppliers that they've moved in. Northern Colorado's benefited in a big way from this, but so did Pueblo, which had no new manufacturing for a very long time. So that's just one business example of what happens if you have this passion and really follow it with policy for building a climate and a clean energy agenda. And I think there's a variety of ways that we in Fort Collins take advantage of that because of what you said, Wade, about it being an innovation community and being tied to an academic community where there's great innovation happening there. You put all that together, this is like this ideal place for a business community to understand the relationship between economic development of the 21st century and actually solving really big problems.
Yeah, thank you. I will tell you, my 23-year-old son Josh is one of those 4,000 employees at Vestas, and so from him, thank you for that. And
buy me a beer.
A local one, of course, right? But I remember when we were all throughout Colorado, cities were talking about Vestas and the value of and evaluating whether they were a good fit for our communities, and Vestas is a remarkable employer, and we're very appreciative that they're in Northern Colorado, and they're a major contributor. And I think it also, as a global company, helps further our brand as well on this area. So, Wade, anything you want to add?
Well, just from a business standpoint and the innovation community perspective, we have a lot of technology companies that really make up our industry in Fort Collins, and a lot of energy technology companies, and just over the last 10-15 years, these companies have worldwide impact. And Bill, we were together in Denmark when Denmark, actually one of our companies here in Fort Collins, was critical to integrating their 40% wind into their electric system and had the technology to do that in a dynamic way. And so, you know, I think about that global impact, but it comes right back to Fort Collins, and it's technology and it's innovation coming here that enables that to happen, and working with the transmission system company in Denmark, and it has relevance here in Colorado and Fort Collins. And Bill, you pointed out, you know, we have low energy costs. In fact, in Fort Collins, our electric, we're in the lower third of all electric in the state of Colorado. And so, you know, we're able to do it in the context of being affordable as well. So I think of other companies that are trying to be lowest cost. You know, I think cost effective and actually meeting our needs. You know, we're not, you know, out of whack in terms of rate structures and things like that. I think if anything, if we begin to use less energy as a local distribution utility, we need to be able to recover the kind of investment it takes in order to manage the distributed energy resources within our community. So I think the rate structure will change, but I don't think it has to be at odds with higher rates necessarily. It'll just be how it's structured will change.
Bill, you note in your book that the Colorado Renewable Portfolio Standard is expiring in 2020. What do you see as next steps?
We do a lot of this work at our center at CSU, the Center for New Energy Economy, and I keep pointing because Mari and Wendy are here. And so the center does a lot of this work and looking, and what's really, I'd say, sad about what's happened in this country, energy efficiency resource standards were being passed by states. There are 32 states that have them. Renewable portfolio standards, there are 29 or 30 states that have them, and it's been very difficult, really since 2010, to pass that at the state level. Just this last year, California and Oregon both went to 50%. But in a lot of other places, this has become politicized. And we really did politicize the debate around clean energy. If you remember sort of 2008, 2009, probably around the time that President Obama was elected, clean energy became viewed as sort of, well, the province of the Democrats, and there were a lot of Republicans that were opposing it, and it was crazy because so many of these things were done in a bipartisan way prior, particularly to 2010. In 2010, there were a lot of state legislators that elected people. It was the biggest turnover of parties in the state legislatures in the United States since like the early part of the 20th century. And there began this conversation about mandates. People said, well, that's a mandate. I want the market to decide how much we have in the way of clean energy. And it's interesting, right? The electricity market has never been unregulated. It's in Texas, ironically, was the first state to regulate it in 1907. And so here you have a regulated industry because it could lend itself to a monopoly or the characteristics of a monopoly that won't protect consumers. And so we regulated, and one of the ways we began regulating it was to also look at how does the mix of energy help us solve environmental issues. And those were renewable portfolio standards. It's very difficult to pass one now in a state that's not totally blue. And so what we're trying to think about is how do we take the politics out of this? How do we depoliticize this? How do we not make this about sort of Republicans versus Democrats or red versus blue, and just say, here are the opportunities, here's the risks that you're managing around, oh, by the way, some of the co-benefits that you get from it, and here are the examples of where we've been able to do this and hold prices low. So I think the governor of Oregon, when she signed a bill saying we're going to a 50% renewable energy standard, she didn't look at that and say, oh, and by the way, poor people, you're not going to be able to afford electricity anymore. She's got a way to protect ratepayers within that, and policymakers should constantly be thinking about that. But we've managed that conversation so far. It's just that now it's become sort of this more politicized thing. It's more heated, and it's more difficult, quite frankly, to do.
Okay. I have two more questions for both of you guys, and I think they're pretty
easy.
Well, you tell me. This one, this is probably an entire seminar at CSU. What does the world look like to you in 25 to 35 years in this space?
You know, I see Fort Collins still being a great place to live, and I see, you know, like a Harmony Road, I think of it like Sandhill Road in Palo Alto, with technology companies that are really reflective of the time. And that's where I see clean energy and technology that is really, Fort Collins is the source for solutions around the world. And the thought leading, when people think about Fort Collins, it's about where solutions are in that regard. So I look at, you know, what makes Fort Collins great. It's a lot of things, and I start with the people that live here, and they're friendly and they say hello. It's a great place to live, work, and play, and to raise a family, and I think we continue to do that. But also, I think we aspire in a lot of ways to have companies that provide solutions. Colorado State University is from the very beginning, its founding in 1870 and Fort Collins in 1864, that we've been joined at the hip. And so that university city element will continue to thrive and provide the kinds of solutions that really provide the industry for the future as well.
So let's go, I'll do 2035, because I think, you know, 2025 is actually not that far away, and things may not look that differently, but I think by 2035, we'll be 15 years prior to that magic year 2050, where you have a variety of climate scientists saying we better hold warming by 2050 to below 2 degrees Celsius, or we're going to experience some cataclysmic effects. Now, we're seeing some things related to climate change already, which leads you to believe maybe the climate scientists have underestimated what warming does to the biosphere over time, what a little bit of warming does in 2 degrees Celsius may do far more than climate scientists have predicted. But at least at 2035, we'll be 15 years away, and we had better, by that time, have figured out a way to get very close to decarbonizing our electricity system. And I think by then, you'll see a great deal of renewables. I think you'll see added nuclear, because people are going to get to the place of appreciating its baseload generation that actually you know, is carbon free. And if carbon becomes the thing that we're most worried about, absent some other baseload technology, nuclear could have a real role to play. I think you'll see storage as a technology play a really important role in supporting things like solar. Whether it supports wind or not, I don't know. But think about, again, the electricity sector. It's going to look a lot different than it did at the end of the 20th century. So that's part of it. The transportation system has to change pretty dramatically too. So we are going to have to understand how to electrify the transportation system differently than we have. There is this very good chance that the transportation system winds up being part of the storage component for solar, for the places that have, you know, utilized solar in a pretty serious way. But there's a variety of other building materials and new technology around building materials that are going to make our houses just more energy efficient and more, we'll be able to conserve energy in a different way than we have. And people, you know, probably a lot of people at the Bell Company sat around and said, you know, there's never going to be a day where you don't need a landline. And, you know, I have 4 kids and none of them have a landline, right? So I'm thinking now a lot of the things that we think we're not going to be able to do without, we might well be able to do without. I just spoke today at the Oil and Gas Association, Colorado Oil and Gas Association meeting in Denver, and there was some discussion, you know, is natural gas a bridge fuel? I actually have a chapter in my book on, you know, the future of natural gas. And, you know, it's kind of hard to say, but I mean, we should imagine a very different future in 2035 than we experience today. Something like on the order of the internet coming along and disrupting us in the information age. I think those kinds of things are possible because the amount of innovation that's happening right now to both transform our electric sector and our transportation system. And we have to understand, I mean, if it happens, the pace of change will be rapid, but there's a lot of very good that can come from it.
So do you have a landline?
No, we don't. My wife and I don't have a landline either. So
we need to talk about that. I cannot get Deb to drop our landline, so I need some advice from you. Well, I'm going to finish with just a real quick question, and what I think a lot of people who hang out with both of you, I think one of the things we most admire in you is your energy and your optimism. And so Wade, I'll start with you and then let Bill finish. You have been such a high energy, optimistic leader around Fort Collins. Can you just share real quickly some of your thoughts around the topic, and why are you so committed and so optimistic about some of this stuff that we're talking about here, but you and I get to talk about on an hourly basis?
Right. Well, I see the opportunity, and as Bill described it, I think we're in this disruptive stage, and that's where you can either recoil and fight it, or it can be part of the opportunity to help change it. And I think that's been part of Fort Collins from the very beginning. But also, I think, and I totally agree that it'll be rapid, and there'll be a lot of, convergence of things, the transportation, electric. I think we've done a lot of things in silos, and those begin to integrate more. We're really talking about energy and how the energy system is reconfigured in a way, and just the solar city, and you think about the Tesla and the battery walls and things like that. I think I don't think there are really any barriers to technology. It's more the systems integration. I think there's regulatory barriers that have been in place for a good reason in the past, but they become challenges, in the future going forward. And then how those become reconfigured. But as I just think of things. You mentioned the cellular versus the landline, but just think of the sharing economy and the Ubers and things like that. How it's totally disrupting, our transportation system. In terms of transit, we're thinking about combination of Ubers and Lyfts with combination with transit and that sort of thing. So there is a lot of transformation going on in our economies, and so, what I'm excited about is I think Fort Collins is well positioned. I think, there's an embracing of the kind of change. I look at the millennials, and they'll be part of the solution, and so, I think that's why I'm optimistic of our future in Fort Collins.
Yeah, so I agree. I mean, I'm actually optimistic as much as I paint this picture of things that we need to be very concerned about. And I don't use a word like existential lightly, or an existential threat lightly. But having said that, I believe we have the opportunity to solve around this problem. And I think as Americans, we have a history of trying to do that for the globe. And so I remain optimistic. There may be a point in time where I'll wish that I had pushed harder or done more or not been so optimistic. But right now, I just see this ability to solve this. And partly it's my kids, having 4 kids that are, between 30 and 23, and looking at all their peers and looking at the way they're attacking problems, but also looking at the lifestyle they have, where they're really willing to sort of reconcile with a bit of a different lifestyle in order to solve problems. And that makes me hopeful.
Yeah. What I hear also is just, and I think I see in both of you, is just the possibilities of the future, and I know you, Wade, particularly, you thrive on those things. You don't, and not knowing you as well, Governor, I think that's exactly it. I see when there's a challenge, you're all over it. And it's the optimism and the hope is really around the challenge and trying to fix. So here's a couple of questions. We are not going to get through all these, and I'm sorry. And I know I'm not sure how much time we have left. I think we have about 15 minutes. So there's a gap between those who are more supportive versus those more skeptical around climate change. How can we bring them closer together? Governor Ritter, what are the key tools you've used to gain consensus?
So, we're doing this convening of 8 Republican governors and 5 Democratic governors, and there's some variety of view on this. And I would say the number one thing, it's going to surprise you coming from me, the number one thing is to listen to people and to hear what they're saying and what the root place is for their skepticism, and not just be about the argument, not be about sort of, you go into your corner, I'll go into mine, we'll come out boxing, but really try and hear sort of what they're about. The second thing is, and it really is about, okay, well, can we find some common ground on kind of moving the needle here? I'm on this board called the Energy Foundation. We do a lot of work in China. And in China, they're really trying to reduce their emissions, but they don't mention climate change because they have serious public health problems from their transportation and their energy sector, and they have emissions that are, literally killing people in a very serious way, given sort of the level of air quality there. And so when we're in China, we're not talking about climate change at all. We're talking about public health, because climate change will be the co-beneficiary of actually dealing with public health in a very serious way. And so I try and kind of find where people are and see if opportunity makes a difference to them, because you can make a business case for a variety of these things and never mention climate change. Jeff Sessions, who's a senator from Alabama, he said, well, do you believe there is climate change? What do you believe about the science? And I said something a lot of people say. I said, I'm not a scientist, but in public life, I believe it's incumbent upon me to manage around risks. And if 97% of these people are saying this is the risk, then in public life, you are derelict in your duty to not at least manage around that risk, apart from what you think about the science.
Good. Wade, I'll give this one to you. How are we working with Platte River Power Authority and other cities, as well as CSU and Larimer County, to achieve 2020 goals?
Great question. And, we have a number of things. I would start off with the city right now in our budget. We looked at most of the budget offers that are in our budget, and they directly benefit our 2020 goals. So, and they're not out of the normal. So, it's basically things we've been doing. They're just focused, dialed appropriately. So it's not, crazy stuff. It's things that we do, but dialed in to accomplish it. And then you think of our institutional partners. And so whether CSU and our private sector businesses and that sort of thing, I think it's working together. CSU is a great record in terms of a lot of sustainability and built into their operations, as well as just faculty making an impact around the world, in the Bill Center for the New Energy Economy and that sort of thing. Just making an impact. But and with PRPA and the 4 municipalities, Fort Collins is one half the energy of PRPA, and so when we're 1/4 of the makeup of PRPA, and so we work together collaboratively. There have been great leadership that has been working with in moving forward. Basically, I think in some respects, Fort Collins has, I think we're not different. We're just a little further ahead. So it's working with the other cities in meeting common goals in doing things. Platte River has brought on, it's more than 20% renewable, including hydro at this point, and about ready to bring on a 30 megawatt solar plant that's at the Rawhide power plant. And so, and also there's been a large commitment with the city of Fort Collins and the other cities and Platte River around energy efficiency, getting to one of the points there that, that's the cheapest and most direct way to make an impact. That's the paybacks are the shortest and that sort of thing. So, I think I've always been a strong advocate for collaboration and working together, and it goes back to Bill's first point on this, is to listen and to work together, because I think we get to better outcomes when we're working together.
Bill, when you were the governor and you were looking at northern Colorado and Fort Collins and cities, what did you think of northern Colorado from are they working together? Are they aligned? Are they aspirational? What was your assessment?
I went to school here.
Okay.
Very quickly, I tried to come back and live here. My wife and I lived in Zambia, and I asked the district attorney for a job. I'd been a prosecutor in Denver for 5 years, and he said, well, you have to start at the very bottom. If he had let me lateral in, I would be a citizen in Fort Collins and maybe never have been the governor.
And was that Stu Van Everen?
Yes, Stu Van Everen, yeah. So I love northern Colorado, and I paid a lot of attention to it, in part because I knew about it as a student up here. My wife went to Greeley, she went to UNC, and so we had this relationship with northern Colorado. And then as I campaigned, really began to understand there was a business community that I first really got to know, and it functioned fairly well,
Right.
and it functioned in a pretty enlightened way. If like I mentioned the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and not in a favorable light, it felt to me like the business community in Fort Collins and really in northern Colorado, including Weld County, and really seemed to be a lot more enlightened about this being the 21st century and us having to chart a different course. Certainly when we began doing our economic development work, and Investus was February of 2007, so my first really big win, it was northern Colorado that we focused on to cite it, because we believed the business community would get this and would do all that was sort of necessary to make sure this worked here. And it did. And because it worked there, then the next two were in Brighton and the fourth one was in Pueblo, and we really owe a lot in Colorado. We owe a lot to northern Colorado for making that happen and then making it, executing it in the right way.
Right, great. Here's another question. What do you see as the most important challenges and cons to advancing the new energy economy and the road to 2020 for cities, states, and U.S.? That's a big question.
Yeah, I've already alluded to it, it's political. I think that the biggest challenge we have is trying to solve for what I call the political chasm. Two sides of the agreement not being able to find common ground. And in the book, I talk a lot about things we could do at the national level, and it would be ideal if we could do these things at the national level in a collaborative way. You said something, Wade, in your last comment that I say, I think in the book, but I certainly say it all the time. I was far better as a governor when the Republicans, as a Democratic governor, when the Republicans were informing the result. When I was able to collaborate across the aisle, and the Democrats, Republicans, myself were working together, we had a better work product at the end of the day. And when that's not happening at all, it's this disaster. And this is, I think, we've seen the effects of this. There's been no energy plan at a national level since 2007. No energy legislation, let alone an energy plan. And this is just wrong. And so the biggest problem we have has to do with this political chasm. And if you read the book, at the end of the book, I talk about the biggest problem we have is actual campaign financing, because it's taken us away from this ability to solve problems across the aisle. There's a lot about campaign financing in this country that you think is totally unrelated to energy policy. It's not at all. It's actually maybe the biggest problem.
Great. Wade, I'm going to direct this to you. How do you envision changes to our local transportation and land use systems with the road to 2020 and beyond? For example, density, walkability neighborhoods.
Well, I think that gets to the land use, and it's actually thinking about like our transit-oriented development. Fort Collins, we're infill city now because our borders are fixed, and we've done a lot of foresight in terms of separators and that sort of thing. And so really, we're becoming more of an urban community with infill. And so you see it along the MAX and our bus rapid transit, and you see higher density buildings going up along the Mason corridor. And you see other, and around campus, and it's really around our transit systems. And we're, we don't have a transportation department. We call it FC Moves. And so intentionally thinking about it in a multimodal sense about how do people get from one place to the other. Since MAX has come online, it's not unusual to have people think about their day differently in terms of how to get from one place to another. Taking their bike, getting on the MAX and going somewhere and riding home and that sort of thing. And so, and those become very intentional land use decisions. I think, and that's transportation. I also start thinking about, more district heating and that sort of thing, integrating more energy systems in campus-like settings, like CSU is a district heating campus, and so it actually there's a lot of efficiencies to be gained through that kind of a system that can in fact be built into building codes and incentives for certain locations in Fort Collins where it makes sense. We also have, an industry, brewery industry, that has a lot of wasted heat, and that can be captured and utilized in other sorts of ways that can be a benefit to the community. We're involved with a waste shed analysis. Our Larimer County landfill is going to be full in 10 years. So what's our future with regards to landfill? Well, we have Road to Zero Waste. And so, you know, one of the things I've been an advocate for since I've been on council is thinking about waste as a resource, not as something to get rid of. And thinking of that in terms of materials management and waste energy and other sorts of things. Energy content that's in our waste streams right now can be utilized for our community, and they call it a circular economy, where you can actually benefit from your waste streams in a direct sort of a way. So, you know, I see a lot of these things starting to come together, and you know, and a lot of that starts with public policy, and it's not punitive. It's one that I think, and again, through this triple bottom line, it can be a win-win-win framework if you just think about it in a more comprehensive sort of a way.
One thing I do want to say to folks that if your interest is land use and transportation systems, and a lot of the conversation we've been having, it's very likely that the council in 2017 and 18 will be initiating a community dialogue, an update to our 10-year plan. And that is a golden opportunity for folks to get involved in really helping define the future of your local government and the community itself. So do please watch out for that, and be very attentive and engaged if you would. It's you know, a plan that's just developed by planners and at City Hall is not a community plan. That's just a document, and we've had such a great history over the last 20, 30 years of developing a plan and then building that plan. Lots of cities plan and don't build, and lots of cities build and don't plan. Fort Collins plans and builds. So please be really attentive to that process. That's very, very important. Okay, so this is it. 30 seconds each. What's the one thing that you didn't share that you'd like to share?
I pretty much shared everything, didn't I, Darren? Well, that it matters at the individual level and it matters at the local level. And I think I alluded to this, but ultimately I think it's incumbent upon us in the United States to be principally involved in solving for climate change. We're a big part of the problem from our emissions, but we're also can be a big part of the answer, because we are innovators and we are inventors. And so you have to kind of think about your own personal habits and your own personal responsibility toward that, and then get involved in the community conversation about how to change a community and hopefully inform the state, and finally be involved in the political process. Because I think, as I said, I think the political process has to change in this country in order for us to truly solve for problems that are global in scope.
Great. Thank you so much. Wade? You
know, I would just say, and it kind of goes back to where I started, but, you know, people in Fort Collins are passionate. They're passionate about all different sorts of things. They love Fort Collins. 94% of people really think we're on the right track in a lot of ways. And so people are optimistic and positive and that sort of thing. And I think with that kind of focus, you know, and Darren and I talk about this a lot, and we had Peter Kageyama come here for the Love of Cities, is that, you know, we believe everybody in our community is co-creator in our community and making it a better community. Everyone has a role in our community and making it a better community. And so with that kind of empowerment and you know, and we have open and honest dialogue amongst on any issue and that sort of thing, I think we can get to better outcomes and working together. And so when everybody's engaged and cares and we're working towards, let's make this place better and than it is right now, you know, that's to me a positive, optimistic future that we have, and everybody has a role in that.
Well, thank you both very much. It's a privilege to be up here with you. I admire, as I said, I admire your optimism and your vision, and again, I just would say thanks for everyone for being here and letting us think big, and then having a conversation about how do we go from vision to aligning resources to that vision, and then making it happen and building systems that ensure that that happens. And I just, you know, I'm deeply motivated by the two of you and the conversation we just had. So I appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Darren. Maybe we can start by just thanking all of you so much for.
Thank you.
Jackie Kozak-Teal. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Fort Collins, and I want to thank you because I just think we're so fortunate to have thought leaders like this in our community. And we're also really fortunate to have engaged citizens. And having all of you here tonight, this is one of the biggest events ever that our city has hosted. So thank you for coming out for this important conversation. And what I learned tonight is pairing aspirational goals with pragmatic solutions and diverse perspectives is really going to help us to create something amazing here and continue to make Fort Collins a wonderful place to live. So thank you. I learned so much this evening. I really appreciated the notion of future was talked about a lot tonight. And Lindsay and I always think about this. What it puts it in perspective for us is our baby daughters will be our age when we meet the 2050 goal of being a carbon neutral city. And that just really puts it into perspective for us. And so as a mom, I'm so grateful to have this conversation and really here for our daughters. We are going to continue this conversation. Mayor mentioned that we have a Futures Committee, and Governor Ritter, you're joining us for that in October. So that will be an opportunity to continue this futures-oriented conversation.
Good, that's right.
So looking forward to that.
I know less about my future than I should, I suppose. Futures Committee.
Yeah. So more future to come in the future. And I just wanted to mention, we had a huge stack of questions, and I'm so sorry we couldn't get to all of them. What it tells me is we're hungry for more dialogue, and I'm so grateful for that.